Well, thank you, Dr. Groza. Encouragers like to be encouraged, right? So I hope that you leave here encouraged. And thank you for this opportunity to speak here in chapel, and Dr. Orge as well. And so good to see you guys. Look forward to visiting with you more at lunch today after chapel. We are in this series. In fact, it's kind of that it's been a while since I was a seminary student. 27 years. That was the last time I got an assignment from seminary until today. So when I was invited, would you preach on 1 Samuel 19? I looked at the series I'd preached on 1 Samuel before as a pastor, but not chapter 19. So this is a brand new sermon for you, fresh from God's word and from my heart, and I hope it's an encouragement to you, and I hope I get a passing grade when it's over with. I am here for thanks in part to Guidestone, who flew me here. They deal in insurance and retirement, and if I mention Guidestone a couple of times, it's because I get a raise every time I say Guidestone. And I think an angel gets his wings, so I just, you might hear it a couple of times. But there's almost 500 employees that just love to help pastors and ministry leaders get financial security and resilience, really for anyone who serves the Lord. And they've been doing it for over 100 years. This is part of the Southern Baptist Convention. So Dr. Dilbeck is a new president, and I'm new in this role. We came together to Dallas. I was saying earlier that we live in Frisco, and I've realized that in California, when I say Frisco, you hear San Francisco, and it's Frisco, Texas, which is going to be 95 degrees today. So I do wish that I lived in San Francisco instead of Frisco right now. So we're going to read in 1 Samuel chapter 19, and you've been hearing some great messages already about the life of David. There's obviously no secrets or shortcuts to ministry resilience for finishing well. David, he started better than he finished. Let's be honest. We know the rest of the story. We don't want to anesthetize his mistakes, but he finished a lot better than Saul. We can agree on that, right? And we see in this chapter some of David's humanity as he becomes afraid, as sometimes we will. And so in chapter 19, I'd like to read from the CSB today, verse 1. Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. But Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. So he told him, "My father Saul intends to kill you. Be on guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are and talk to him about you. When I see what he says, I'll tell you." So this is his best friend. Jonathan's looking out for him. Verse 4, Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, and he said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you. He took his life into his hands when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. So why would you sin against innocent blood by killing David for no reason?" Verse 6, Saul listened to Jonathan's advice and swore an oath, which meant absolutely nothing. Saul didn't have any character. "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed." So Jonathan summoned David and told him all these words. Then Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as he did before. We're going to continue further into the text as we go along, but I want to share 3 lessons and 3 takeaways from chapter 19, this part of David's life that I hope will be helpful to you. And the first thing in David's life is very much in jeopardy, not just here, but for many years afterwards, as Saul is insecure in his insecurity, trying to take away what he sees as a challenger, as a potential successor that would make him lose his job and his status. But in this process, one thing I learned about David and about ministry, having been in it for now 35 years, is that there will always be people who want to help you. Now, this is important because there are going to be times when your back's against the wall and it seems like everybody in your church or your ministry they're not supporting you, or some are against you. And sometimes you can't tell the difference, right? If they're not speaking up on your behalf, then they might as well be speaking against you. And so we see Jonathan step up. And we also will see that his wife stepped up. And although she wasn't consistent in this, she did save his life. And it says in verse 8, when war broke out again, we pick up where we left off. David went out and fought against the Philistines. He defeated them with such great force that they fled from him. Now an evil spirit sent from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his palace holding a spear. And David was playing the lyre. So here he is playing music with Saul staring at him with a spear in his hand. That's a little bit intimidating. And Saul tried to pin David to the wall with a spear. And as the spear struck the wall, David eluded Saul, ran away, and escaped that night. Saul sent agents to David's house to watch for him and kill him in the morning. But his wife, Michal, warned David, if you don't escape tonight, you will be dead tomorrow. So she lowered David from the window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took the household idol, put it on the bed, placed some goat hair on its head, and covered it with a garment. And when Saul sent agents to seize David, Michal said, he's sick. And Saul sent his agents back to David and said, bring him on his bed so that I can kill him. When the agents arrived, to their surprise, the household idol was on the bed with some goat hair on its head. Saul asked Michal, why did you deceive me like this? It's a father-daughter tense moment, wouldn't you think? You sent my enemy away, and he has escaped. She answered to him, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? So obviously they didn't have a great marriage here. She's thrown him under the bus. And David fled, escaped, and went to Samuel. So now you have three people who have assisted him. David's life's in jeopardy. God's promised him he'd be the successor to the throne. He believed the Lord, but in his fear, he needed some people to step up. Jonathan, Michal, now his mentor, Samuel. So he went to Samuel, and he got some help. He got some help. When he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him everything Saul had done to him, then he and Samuel left and stayed at Naioth. And it was reported to Saul that David was at Naioth in Ramah, and he sent agents to seize David. However, when they saw the group of prophets prophesying with Samuel leading them, the Spirit of God came on Saul's agents, and they also started prophesying. And when they reported to Saul, he sent other agents, and they also began prophesying. Now, I'm going to leave some of this difficult text for the professionals. So if you want to understand this, ask your professors what all this means. So Saul tried again and sent a third group of agents, and they began prophesying. Then Saul himself went to Ramah. He came to the largest cistern at Saku and said, where are Samuel and David? At Naioth in Ramah, someone said. So he went to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God also came on him. And as he walked along, he prophesied until he entered Naioth in Ramah. Saul then removed his clothes and also prophesied before Samuel. He collapsed and lay naked all that day and all that night. And that is why they say, is Saul among the prophets? Now you see why I've never preached on this chapter. So, God has a way of controlling the situation. You and I will never be in line for any monarchy. Probably won't have a hit on our life from the president. But our life and our ministry will be threatened. If you're in ministry very long, you already know this, and most of you are already in ministry. Those of you online, those who are here in the room, you're on the front lines of ministry. You know that you're going to get criticized. You know that sometimes you might even have your livelihood threatened, your position threatened. But don't forget that you will always have people that God sends in your ministry that are there to help you. It won't seem like it sometimes, but there will always be someone that will try to help you. The picture that you have up here is of Henry Worsley. Henry Worsley, about my age, British explorer, former officer in the British Army, was trying to do what Sir Ernest Shackleton attempted to do 100 years ago and failed, traverse the Antarctic, and in a solo mission. Basically, he was trying to get from here to Salem, Oregon, by himself in sub-zero temperatures. He had all his supplies with him. No one would bring them in. He had no one to help him, and he was trying to do this in January 24th, 2016. So you see two pictures there. Henry would do a diary on his phone every day, at the end of the day, talking about the challenges. And he'd been going after this for 71 successive days, alone in the Antarctic, by himself, when we see the second picture. And this was his last diary. Of the 913 miles that he traveled, he was 30 miles short of his goal. And here's what he said in this last diary entry. Worsley says, the 71 days alone on the Antarctic with over 900 statute miles covered and a gradual grinding down of my physical endurance finally took its toll today, and it is with sadness that I report its journey's end, so close to my goal. So they came, he still had a pulse, but he didn't recover. At the end of that day, he passed away. And I read that in the news when it came out, and my first thought was, wow, that's sad. He has a wife, his kids, a legacy, getting so close to your goal. And to be honest with you, my second thought was, what a moron. What is so admirable about achieving something by yourself? The Apostle Paul traveled roughly 10,000 miles, but I don't see any evidence that he traveled any of them alone. And if you try to do ministry alone, if you try to do life alone, your life's in danger. Because God uses people, his people, to help us. And he has people in your life right now, whether you know it or not, that will help you not only start well, but to finish well. And we all have people we wish were in the room, or wish we're online, wish we're in seminary, wish we're in the ministry, that are no longer in the ministry, have disqualified themselves for some reason because they tried to do ministry alone. They tried to do life alone. To cross the Antarctic unaided was not an admirable goal, or realistic for that matter. Sometimes David felt alone, very much alone, and in caves and on the run, and sometimes he acted crazy, and sometimes he acted courageously. But he was never alone. God never left him alone, never left the Apostle Paul alone. He felt like it sometimes. He said, Demas has deserted me, Paul did, in 2 Timothy 4. Crescent's gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia, only Luke's here. Luke's like, hey, I'm something. I'm taking notes and keeping you alive. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me. He even said, everyone deserted me. You ever felt that way? Like everybody's deserted me? Where are my friends? But at the end of Romans, we have 33 people listed by name who helped him. And one of those, Onesiphorus, is my favorite. I look forward to meeting him someday. In 2 Timothy 1:16, it says, may the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me. That's a wonderful word, refreshed. It's a breath of fresh air is what that means. And Proverbs 11:25 says, whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. And sometimes you're going to need to be refreshed. Because as a caregiver, whatever ministry position you're in, sometimes you're going to have to switch the script and let people minister to you, right? And that might be counterintuitive and uncomfortable, but you're not going to finish well if you don't let people help you along the way. And Paul said, there's a guy I want to shout out to Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. On the contrary, when he was in Rome, he diligently, and I love this, he searched me out. He searched for me and he found me. Not easy to do because he was in prison. So who's refreshing you? I mean, right now. If I was to do a shout out, I'm not going to, and I would say, hey, who's your best friend? I do this with pastors all the time. I stopped doing it because it became awkward. I'd say, everybody tell me your best friend's name on the count of 3. And sometimes I ask pastors, just one-on-one, and sometimes they just say, I don't have a best friend. Or I'll follow up with, well, when's the last time you talked to him? When's the last time you've connected? Isolation can be very dangerous. And you need cheerleaders, not just guest speakers from the other Frisco. You need an encourager that's life on life. But it is nice to come to Gateway Seminary and have encouragers, because you know what? I found encouragement here. I pastored, he said, for 27 years, was a senior pastor, and then started pastoring pastors about 8 years ago. And it was the first seminary chapel I ever spoke at was this one, behind this pulpit, because Dr. Orge Groza gave me my first shot. The first time we ever did a marriage event for pastors was in San Diego. Mike and Judy Carlisle invited us to do that, and we've done 100 marriage events since then. But somebody had to give us a shot, a rep, an at-bat. Somebody had to believe in us. Daryl Lackey invited us to do a marriage event, one of the first retreats we'd ever done, if not the first one. Jim Wilson always encourages me to be an author that I aspire to be, even though I write very slow and sometimes got discouraged. He would encourage me. I get to go to all the seminaries, and they're all awesome, okay? I don't have favorites, right? But please know this. This is a grace zone you're in. And there are encouragers here, right here in this room, in this building, and accessible, an email or phone call away, that would do anything to help you. And you will always have people that want to help you. Here's the other side of the coin. You'll also, if you're a ministry leader, and if you're not a ministry leader, why are you even here, right? No, I'm just kidding. If you're helping your church, if you're a leader, you always have people try to help you. You will also always have people try to hurt you. So David shouldn't have been surprised when someone was trying to take away his reputation, take away his courage, take away his life. And he had Jonathan. And I honestly, one of the first people I want to meet, this is my Old Testament hero. Everybody has their favorite Old Testament person and their favorite New Testament. Mine's Jonathan for many reasons. I'm a bow hunter. That's one of them. But Jonathan is the kind of faithful friend I want to be, right? And Jonathan, someone else gets to speak about that friendship, but I'll just dip into verse 1 of chapter 18. David finished speaking with Saul. Jonathan was bound to the life of David's, what it means in close friendship. I'm not talking about a casual friendship. I'm talking about a close covenant friendship, which we'll talk about in a minute, and loved him as much as he loved himself. So he needed Jonathan, because Jonathan's father, it says in verse 12, was afraid of David. When you get hassled, criticized, persecuted by people in your church, in your ministry, because that's where most of the criticism comes from, is inside. But whether it's inside the church or outside the church, generally people that are hostile are people who are afraid. Their pain's coming out of pain. In the case of Saul, his insecurity took front and center. He was afraid of David. That's why he was trying to take him. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man is a snare, but the one who trusts in the Lord is protected. So you will have critics. Paul had critics. He did what we can't do. I wish I could do sometimes in my ministry. I'm glad I didn't. But that's call names, right? He called out Alexander 2 times, Hymenaeus 2 times. You get called out twice by the Apostle Paul, you've really done some damage, right? Philetus, and he calls them, talks about their speech like gangrene. So we always will have enemies, and I'm not encouraging you to call out their names because we have more weapons to react to people's criticism than ever before. Not just, do we have a bully pulpit sometimes, a bully pen, or even social media, but that reaction has diminishing returns. Ultimately, though, don't want you to be surprised when somebody in your ministry tries to hurt you. I'm not minimizing it, but I am normalizing it because you can read from page to page, everyone on the front lines will get criticized. And one of the temptations will be that you'll play resume roulette, trying to find a church that doesn't have goats in it and wolves in it, and you're just not going to have it. All of them have goats and wolves. Paul told the leaders in Ephesus, the church he planted, he said, be on guard for yourselves and for the flock to which the Holy Spirit has appointed you as overseers, to shepherd the church of God. Because after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. He wasn't trying to discourage them. He just wanted to be ready. And that's what I'm trying to do with you, is help you, because conflict is inevitable if you're in a church with people in it, right? Because every church is basically a dysfunctional family on some level because we're all sinners. And so have realistic expectation that in your church, if you're doing it right, you will have sheep and you will have goats. You will have people that are cheering you on, applauding you, and you'll have people that are jeering behind your back, trying to take you. And that's normal. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you need to know it's ready. You need to be ready for it. And then the third point is that God will use both for your good and his glory, right? So, both, some people are going to help you, some people are going to hurt you. That's normal, and God will use both for his glory and for your good. So be ready, in season, out of season. I remember, if I were to ask you to share your greatest church wound, you would not have to think about it very long. I know mine. 35 years, I could name the date when I found out that my associate pastor was going to start a church half a mile away. My associate pastor I'd served with for 10 years and promoted up. And he took 100 people and started a church half a mile away. And I never saw it coming. I feel even embarrassed to say, I'd never even thought about it. I had him preaching 9 Sundays every year on Sunday morning. I wanted him to succeed. But that was a personal wound. And that happened to someone that was very close to. Those are the kind of pain points that you go, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This stopped being fun a long time ago. So what could I do with less pain and more money? And you have a pretty long list that comes up right away. So 3 quick takeaways, takeaways I want to leave with you. 1, resist the temptation to retaliate. Resist the temptation to retaliate. I put them all up there. So that's just pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And Romans 12:17 just lays it out there. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Give careful thought to do what is honorable in everyone's eyes, if possible, and it's not always, but if possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That means not everyone wants to live at peace, but as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. This is Romans 12. And he says, friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for God's wrath, because it is written, vengeance belongs to me. I will repay, says the Lord. Now, you're familiar with these scriptures. Fact is, I only speak to ministers, and they already know the scriptures. They already know the answers. I'm here to encourage you to do what you already know to do. And sometimes, though, you need a reminder, because it's at a pain point where we're vulnerable to react. And listen, you should know if you're Saul, and Saul was not thinking clearly. If he was, he'd think, I don't think it's a good idea to throw a spear at my greatest warrior. Right? Because if David took that spear and threw it back, you think he was going to miss? He'd taken down lots of Philistines, a lot tougher than that cranky old guy. And so he could have taken, and you know the story, that's somebody else's text, at the cave, when he could have taken Saul's life so many times. Resist the temptation to retaliate. Turn away from evil, Proverbs 31 says. Do what is good. Seek peace and pursue it. We're called to pastor our people, not to police our people. And I'm not advocating passivism, but the fact is Matthew 18:15, still God's game plan for malcontents in your ministry. As a group, you're to practice discipline, not to take wrath into your own hands. Resist the temptation to retaliate. The other I learned from this passage is to remember who the real hero is in your ministry, right? Remember who the real hero is, because David had to be reminded that even though he was the future king, God was actually the fortress and stronghold that we just read about in Psalm 59. And I love that scripture Dr. Watson read. And I won't read the whole psalm again, but if you look at that psalm, in the context was this chapter. That's why he read it. So this is when he wrote the psalm, after they tried to take his life, and Michal saved his life. And so he is not talking about his wife. He's not talking about Jonathan. He's not talking about Samuel. He's not talking about himself. He's talking about Yahweh. And he says, you're my hero. You are my fortress. You are my stronghold. And he says, my faithful God, verse 10, will come to meet me. God will let me look down on my adversaries. And in verse 14 of Psalm 59, it says, and they returned it, the conspirators that was sent by Saul, they returned at evening, snarling like dogs, prowling around the city. They scavenge for food and growl as if they're not satisfied. But I will sing. They're going to snarl, and while they're snarling, I'm going to sing. How about that for a game plan, right? I'm going to sing while they snarl. Sing of your strength and joyfully proclaim your faithful love in the morning. For you have been a stronghold for me, a refuge in my day of trouble. Who's the hero of your life? That same person is the hero of your ministry. And sometimes it's hard to forget or hard to remember who the hero is. Who's running things in your church, in your ministry? Who's in charge? David said, you know what? He's my stronghold. I've got nobody else that can really help me. I can only run so far from Saul around here. And when he does run, he runs into the camp of the Philistines, and acts like a lunatic. So he doesn't have a lot of places to run, but he knows who the hero of his story is. And he sings songs to them as they snarl at him. Resist the temptation to retaliate. Remember who the real hero is. And finally, establish 3 or 4. It's arbitrary, it's subjective. This is not a scriptural number, but establish at least one. I would recommend 3 or 4 covenant relationships. Same gender, all right? Unless it's your spouse. So your first love, if you're a Christian, your first love is Jesus. Your second love, if you're married, is your spouse. So that makes it easy for me. Jesus and Janet are my first love and my second love. And if they're happy with me, I don't really need anybody else's applause, right? Life's good. If either Jesus or Janet are not happy with me, it doesn't matter how much applause I get. Life's not great. But for a strong, growing marriage, I need friendships outside my marriage as well with people in my gender. She doesn't need to hold all the weight of my life on her own. So in 1982, that person came into my life named Paul Coleman. I didn't have a bow back then. I'm not sure. I love Paul enough to give him my bow, but I think I do. But Jonathan said, you own my heart. And so he takes it, because there's not weapons, or not available because the Philistines banned them. And so he gives him his weapon, he gives him his spear, his bow, his robe, and all this formality in chapter 18. And they establish a covenant, and the covenant gets formalized. And I'm going to ask you a sensitive question I want you to think about, and I ask you to share it with somebody around you. But of that friendship, who is it that you can call on anytime about anything? Because I can tell you, being a pastor for 35 years, there are a lot of pastors and ministry leaders who have people all around them, but nobody close to them. Lots. And every ministry meltdown you see, usually by somebody who stiff-armed the people that God sent to help them. You always have God's people that are going to hurt you, but you also, if you let them, God's sending people into your life. They're trying to help you. It's called the body of Christ. And you have enough people there to hold your arms up and to keep you going, to keep you moving. He had Jonathan, and and that friendship went all the way to the end, and he took care of Jonathan's kids, as you know. Paul Coleman and I started ministry the same time. I started pastoring in San Antonio, Texas, 1987. That year, the pastor of the largest Southern Baptist church in the country had an affair, multiple affairs came to light. Prestonwood Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. Billy Weber was his name. Later that year, it was not Jimmy Swaggart, but Baker. And then 6 months after Baker fell, it was Swaggart. And you had all these people, and those weren't Baptists, but then the guy was my youth minister, disqualified himself. Then the guy that preached the camp that I got saved at, a whole different guy, disqualified. So within my first year of ministry, between 1987 and 88, all these public failures were going on, and I got to be honest with you, I was scared to death. I just started. I was 23 years old, and I got married that year and took second year Greek that year and pastored my first church that year. That was an overwhelming year for me, right? So I called Paul, which is long distance. This is before cell phones. It was very expensive to call long distance back then. I said, man, I'm afraid. I want to finish well someday. I need your help. We call each other every week since then. Every week. God sent a couple other covenant friendships into my life. One went to heaven recently, and then a couple others stepped into this place. But the fact is, we're not going to finish well alone, nor should we. Jonathan, let me leave you with this verse. In chapter 23, a few chapters ahead, verse 16, it says that Jonathan helped him find strength in God. The context of this, Saul's still chasing him. He's in the wilderness. He's cornered. He's got him pinned. And his men are afraid. They're ready to rebel on him. He's got 600 guys with him, but they're all cornered. And then verse 16, then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh in this wilderness and encouraged him in his faith in God. What's important about this is that Jonathan went out of his way, again, risking his own life, going against his father to save David, but he encouraged him in his faith in God. In other words, Jonathan was not enabling him as like, hey, I got your back, right? Like, I got you. No. Jonathan came all that way to say, God's got you. And you want a good covenant friendship, it's somebody that won't be your crutch. It won't be somebody that's your hero. It'll be somebody that reminds you who the real hero is. If you've got somebody like that in your life, then you're good to go, right? If your spouse, if you're married, if your spouse is encouraging your faith in God and your best friend is encouraging your faith in God, then honestly, the devil doesn't have a chance. But you have to manage those relationships. You're responsible for the growth of your marriage. It's in our job description. You're responsible for your friendships. So last question, I want to ask you where you were on March 12th, 2020. Just think about it. Where were you March 12th, 2020? How many of you know where you were? Raise your hand. Okay. What's significant about that date? Out loud, really loud where I can hear you. Anybody remember? Yes, that's right. That's right. Pandemic. It was officially pandemic became official March 12th. I remember because I was speaking to a group of pastors in Wewoka, Oklahoma. Yeah, I'd never been to Wewoka. I didn't know where it was either. Even when I was there, I didn't know where it was. And when I got there, I met all these pastors, and we had lunch together, and they sang happy birthday to me because March 12th is my birthday. And it was a great day, and we had fun, all that. And then we find out together that, hey, there's a pandemic. What's a pandemic? We had to look it up. So what do? I don't know. Well, on my way home, I know what to do. I did what good Americans should do. I went to the store, and I bought some toilet paper, Pop-Tarts, and ammunition, you know? Like, I don't know what to do, but I'm ready. But there's another pastor on that same day, Jack Eckles. Here's what Jack did on March 12, 2020, when all the nursing homes were closing that day, and rightfully so. His wife of 70 years was in one of those nursing homes. Jack was retired Baptist preacher. I read about this in the Wall Street Journal, and I've not been able to tell this story without crying. Because you want to know what covenant love looks like? That's it. Jerry, advanced stages of Alzheimer's. He fed her every meal. So he goes home, packs a bag, moves into the nursing home where he knows he'll never leave. Wall Street Journal picks up on the story and asks, what were you thinking? And he simply said, we're married. I want to be with her. She took care of me for 70 years, and now it's my turn. Friends, if you find that kind of love, thank God for it. We all need it. Some of you are maybe not married, and you're thinking about it. Find a Jack or a Jerry that will keep the promises, and they will help you finish well.